Hi y'all, I'm a little late. Sorry. Oh wait. Headphones. Sorry y'all, I'm a little late. Okay. I was trying to get food prior to coming on here, but things take a lot longer now because everything's a mess. Okay, so now I'm live. Hopefully folks can see me and folks can join. We are discussing the last part. I am going to eat a little bit while I'm doing this, even though it's probably a bad idea because I have braces and everything gets stuck in my teeth now. But we are discussing Homegoing, which is one of my favorite books. And oh man, it's kind of rough reading it during all this pandemic stuff because this book it's not a happy book. I don't want to say it's depressing, but I reread it this past week and I'm like, damn, like, ain't no breaks caught. This entire book is like the Black experience is traumatic through and through every step of the way. Wave and comment hi if you're here watching. All right, so I'm gonna pull up the syllabus and ooh, why is it so big? 75, 50%. Okay, there we go. And get into it. I want to kind of talk about the whole book. Oh, sorry you have a migraine. It's been hard for everyone. We're all dealing like anxiety and stress and everything is just showing up in all types of ways for all of us. It is hard for everybody. Today was a very sad day. Okay, so I'm going to eat this little bit of sushi while I do this. But yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about the whole book. First of all, I would love for y'all to let me know what was your favorite chapter. So Homegoing follows the breakdown of two sisters, half sisters from Ghana. One's lineage gets sold into the chattel slave trade in the United States of America. And then the other one's family remains in Ghana. And I really enjoy this book because, within the African diaspora wars that tends to pop off on social media, I think this book is a really good example of how no part of the diaspora evaded the trauma of the transatlantic slave trade. Like, it was a loss for everyone. But I really appreciate it. Like, this book does follow pretty accurate history. Like, you can tell there was a lot of research done both on the Ghanaian side and on the American side. But it does follow the actual historical patterns for both communities. And it really highlights how, in essence, even though one can say, oh, I'm Ghanaian, they both kind of lost their family lineage. Like both sides. Ooh, let me look up their names shout out to the front of the book having a family tree, okay? Afia and Essie, right? So Essie's lineage is Essie gets sold into slavery, and then Afia's family stays in the States, but they both kind of lose lineage, right? Like, you get down to part 2, and Yaa doesn't really know that he is part of royalty, that his family married into Ashanti royalty. And in the same way that the American side doesn't know that they're actually Ghanaian, there is both suffer a loss of identity, and the claims that they have to who they are both centered around the identity that white supremacy gave to them. Okay, so Alana is saying, the first reading, Kojo was my favorite, but devastating. With the second reading, I had a new appreciation for Willie's chapter. So I will say, my first time reading this book, my favorite chapter was Kojo's, and not that it was my favorite, like that his storyline was my favorite. It was the most emotionally impacting, right? The code of, what is it, 1850, when they allowed, it was actually a federal law that allowed them to catch slaves who had escaped to the north and return them to the south, right? And I want to say it is the U.S. Code of 1850 or Marshall Code of 1850. And, this law also brought about the beginning of the police as we know it in the United States. So that had the most like political and historical reference to me. And it was just like the way it happened I know it sucks that this book is like, okay, you get one chapter with each character and it kind of ends, but that really is like, that's it. Like, that really is it. Um, and so Kojo's the first reading was really the one that I remember I was on the A train in New York and I had to put my sunglasses on because I was not ready. I was not expecting it to take a sharp right like that. And for that, it's okay. I'm late too, girl. We all late together. I'm just getting on. I'm trying to eat my little bit of food. But I was not expecting it to take a hard left like that. I think on my second reading, I have more appreciation for Willie and Sunny's storyline. I will say my first reading, my critique overall of the book was that when you get to the second half, it felt like there was more of a connection on the writer's part to the Ghanaian lineage. And once we get to H's storyline, it just felt like okay, this is what I read in the history books happen. And some of the nuance that I saw on the Ghanaian side, I didn't really feel on the American side. So that was kind of like the like one critique I had of the book, but it was. I think now that I'm like, I'm reading this book like 6-7 years apart. I think, when did I first read it? I was definitely living in New York the first time I read it. And I haven't lived in New York in like 7 years, but now reading it again, I think being older, Willie and Sunny do resonate with me more. But I think the first time I read it, it kind of fell off for me because I was thinking, all right, well, this doesn't feel like it. I don't feel the author's attachment to these storylines in the way that I felt she was attached to Yao or Akua and then Marjorie. All right. So part two is where we're starting. We start with H, which is a devastating storyline about how he got put into. So H is a descendant of. I'm bad with names, but Anna. So H is a descendant from Kojo's chapter, where Anna, his wife, who was free, got swept up in the law that passed that allowed them to hunt down slaves who had escaped to freedom, but also just kind of created a police state, really as we know it in the United States, and gave them carte blanche to kind of entangle blacks, regardless of whether they were free or not, back up into slavery. We see Anna get caught, and that's kind of where Kojo's chapter ends. And then, when we come back around, we're now at H, and it turns out Anna was sold down to a plantation, I want to say in Mississippi, and they had to cut the baby out of her essentially because she committed suicide after being sold back into slavery. And it's interesting that they never gave him another name because the mother only referred to him as H. It's kind of interesting that they gave her that honor of carrying on the name that they gave to that she had for the child, and they didn't bother to call him at least Henry or something. I don't know. H is essentially was in the syllabus a sharecropper who was protesting as 4 police officers arrest him and throw him into a jail cell. The alleged crime was that he was looking at a white woman. According as Morgan writes in the syllabus, she says that Gyasi was evoking the spirit of Emmett Till and countless other black men and boys who have been deemed criminal due to alleged interactions with white women. And so in this chapter, H is getting like his first taste of freedom, and his freedom is quickly taken away to him as he's sold. What was it called? The penal system. At the time, I think it wasn't considered like a prison system. It was considered a penal system, and which same language, but that's what they were calling it, or same meaning. And they were selling convicts into chain gangs. And that is how much of the infrastructure of the southern United States was built, was through chain gang labor. And it is, again, like I'm going to say this a million one times, the criminal justice system as we know it was built around the idea of the loophole in the 13th Amendment that allowed them to use forced labor against people that were convicts. Kojo Mama, yeah, yeah. Like Ness, it is kind of crazy how Ness gave up her whole life to allow Kojo to escape to freedom. And then his youngest son, you have to remember though, I think because we continue with H, he had 7 other children, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Am I counting right? 7. He had 7 other children who did supposedly, continue on their lives in Baltimore and were able to still hold on to freedom. But one of his children was sold back, and that's the storyline that we continue with. Yeah, H did basically walk straight from his sharecropping to jail, and then ends up in jail for what, 15 something years? And it's hard. Not only is he in jail, but he becomes a coal miner that's not getting paid anything. That because of his strength and even doing well at the job, it just digs him deeper into the hole. Like there was no out. There was no way for him to escape this torture. But then when we come back to Willie, we understand that he was able to have children later in life, and that Willie has very positive memories of his father, of her father, as he was able to join, the coal miners union and kind of fight for some more rights. And, all that has historical precedence, right? That unions, and at the time of FDR, when we finally get the Social Security Act of 35, unions did provide an outlet for Black middle class, or for Black people to elevate from low income to at least working class, and some into middle class, as they were able to come together with poor whites and fight for better economic opportunities and better labor laws. So unionization actually has a pretty good history amongst the Black folks. Okay. Now, important to consider to H's chapter. What is a possible... Oh, let me just put this question. Why are you being so shady? You know what? We're going to open this in preview, because Acrobat Reader is so honoring with like copying and pasting things. What is the possible significance of Gyasi including the story of H's brief relationship with the white convict, Thomas? Ooh, so many people. I'm going to put the question on the screen. Dang. Where am my little text thing? Nope, that's not what I went. This is what I went. Text. Add. Let's see how it appears. Okay, here we go. I think this is an important role because it shows how white people were caught up in the criminal justice system as it was beginning to be formed, but also how it was still a sacrifice on the back of the Blacks. Like they didn't face the same thing. And so I don't know what real significance I feel like Thomas was. What is the importance of names in this chapter, and what does it mean for H to be free, and does he ever change freedom? If anybody has any thoughts. Yes, they did. They absolutely expected less from Thomas. And it was part of his story that irked me. His life was tied to that white man actually working. And yeah, it's true, because it's kind of like the same thing as like cotton picking, right? You can pick more bags, you can be more efficient, but then they expect you to come back and do the same thing again. And then your livelihood depends on it, because if your white partner, indentured slaves weren't picking up their load, it was expected that you picked it up too. And then the punishment would never come down on the white man. It would always come down on you. And the white person just became an added liability for you. Yes, you think the purpose was to show how Black and white workers could be in the same space and still be considered greater than the Black workers. I think generally the white character was absolutely to show the ability that even though white folks were put in the system, they still didn't face the same impacts. Okay, this quote is a little messed up. There we go. It don't matter if you was or wasn't. All they gotta do is say you was. That's all they gotta do. You think cause you all big and muscled up, you safe? Nah, them white folks can't stand the sight of you. Walk around free as can be. Don't nobody want to see a Black man like you walking around proud as a peacock, like you ain't got a lick of fear in you. And that was the line that was essentially suggesting why H even got caught up in the system. It was nothing he could do. It was nothing he could do. They were just out to get him because he was a confident black man. It made me so mad when he did it. I knew from that point on they would expect that out of him every time. Yeah, so when he picked up Thomas's load and went double because Thomas couldn't even pick up the hatch. That was crazy. And he ended up putting himself in, well, did he put himself in the early grades? It took some at least if it didn't necessarily take whole years. Because I don't think it alluded to how old he was when he actually passed in Willie's chapter. But you knew it took the quality off of his life. Like, can you imagine living a life like that and still getting up every morning to go on? All right. So after H, we move on to Akua. Woo! This chapter, this chapter was a lot both times I read it. Like, oh man. And I thought it was interesting that when we look at I can't even say this word. I can see it. Infanticide. When you kill your kids, which is a theme that comes up amongst slave women. But it was interesting that we did this from the perspective of someone killing her children in her sleep because of a vision that was constantly coming to her from the evils that and the atrocities that were committed by her family members. So essentially, it's in this chapter we get this kind of reoccurring theme in a very devastating way. How the sins of your father or your grandfather, in this case, her grandfather, who went on to participate in the slave trade, and she comes from a lineage of men who have sold slaves and participated in the slave trade, how that sort of trauma manifested through her lineage. So how does Akua's character and role as a mother complicate gender stereotypes as they relate to motherhood? Also, let me add this question in. What is the significance and role of the fire woman that haunts Akua in her dreams? Let me tell you, I was reading, like, when is she going to wake up from this dream to realize it was real this time? I mean, and like, I'm rereading this chapter, like, wait, is this a chapter where she burned her babies? And it's so, oh man, this was a tough chapter. This was a really tough chapter. I don't know that the children were ever properly identified in her dream, but from my reading, I thought that the two children were Athea and Essie. That they both were like that the two children were the representation of the divergence of the lineage. And Akua dealing with these visions was because her lineage was participated in the same disgusting sort of system that led her other side of the family to be sold into slavery. I thought it was symbolic of the foundation of the tree that's discussed in this book, the foundation of their lineage from the point that we pick it up at the beginning of Homegoing. This chapter was something else. Yeah, because the quote that's pulled in the syllabus, I'm going to add it here. In her dreams, the fire was shaped like a woman holding two babies to her heart. The fire woman would carry these two little girls with her all the way to the woods of the inland, and then the babies would vanish, and the fire woman's sadness would send orange and red and hints of blue swarming every tree, every bush in sight. Well, because we remember, right, at the beginning, so Athea and Essie are half sisters, right? And Athea is kind of like sold off to the castle by her stepmother, but she grew up with the loving experience of her father, right? Essie, am I getting this correctly? Man, there's so many people that remember the book. Essie was caught up in someone in her family making a bad decision. Not in her family, but someone in the tribe that they lived within making a bad decision about antagonizing another tribe. But they both, their mother, but Essie was left behind by her mother who ran away into the fire. Or did Essie grow up with her mother? Girl, I'm getting confused. Mame ran off, at least with Afia. I just read this book like 3 days ago. Why don't I remember what happened? I know Mame ran off into a fire, and Afia didn't even know who her mother actually was. And she grew up with this really mean stepmother who basically sold her off as a bride to one of the Englishmen in the castle to spite the fact that the father had an affair with a house servant who set fire and then like gave birth to the baby and then set a fire and ran off. Okay, Essie did grow up with the mother, but the way she was sold into slavery is you're right, the mother, this is absolutely here. The Mame, who was mom to both Essie and Afia, chose to stay behind and we assume perish in the fire that was set to their village because they had antagonized another rival tribe or another group, right? And Essie got caught when she tried to run up the tree to escape. So Essie did grow up with Mame, right? So she knew her actual mother. Afia didn't. But the theme around the mother, Mame, was the fire. And so I think the fire with these two girls kind of is symbolic of the root of the tree as we know it. Yes. And their curse was that the fire would haunt their family for generations. Yep. That is exactly it. I feel like the fire woman represented her lost ancestry, which Akua and H had no connections to since they both grew up without their parents in these oppressive spaces. You know, that is a good parallel, though, specifically to the point that at this point in the book, because Akua is of the same generation as H, and they both lose the connection to their immediate predecessor, right? That they didn't know. Well, Akua did know her mother, but her mother died when she was relatively young. But she didn't know the royal heritage of Lakosawa. Dang. I'm looking at this like which one of the women that they married was it Nana Yaa? See, look, if I had a better grasp on Ghanaian culture, I know mad people with the last name Mensa though. And all the like nods the book gives to like Fanti. Is that how you say it? Fanti, Ashanti, and then God culture. Okay, let's move on. I think this is going to be the best discussion part of the discussion. Willie, because once Akua, am I saying? I feel like all these names are like, dang, I have a colonizer's tongue. Like, can I say them correctly? Well, let's go back to Akua real quick. I was happy with the way overall that Akua's storyline wraps up. Even though this was part of the critique that I have of the book, right? Because Akua, who becomes known as the crazy woman or the crazy lady, is the only person whose storyline thoroughly continues later into the book. And we get a distinct understanding of what her interactions generations on means versus on the African American side, like everyone is still just a blurb. Like they just kind of, I mean, well, Willie kind of like lingers around, but there's not like Sonny or nor Marcus come back with like this real deep connection to Willie and what her role in the family is, in the same way that Marjorie has a connection to her grandmother, Akua. Which is why I felt like there was a deeper connection to the Ghanaian side and to understanding some of the nuances of that versus the African American side felt like, all right, we're just going to follow what the history books said happened in the African American community. But even with that said, I appreciated the way Akua's storyline wrapped up, even though she, in her sleep killed her own children essentially, but that there was some sort of redemption that came back around. Mm. So let's move on to Willie. So I personally thought that Willie's story was so sad and so connected to the way that so many Black women have lived the society, right? Willie was like, had a beautiful singing voice, had a talent, came to New York. Oh man, you know what touched me about Willie's storyline? Is I wasn't really sure about the timeline because here it gets a little murky about what year. I guess Willie would have been an adult in the 1920s, what it sounds like. So my great grandmother, my Nana, Ethel Louise Nelson, was born in 1904 in Harlem, New York, right? She had my grandfather with a nigga named Herbert, and that nigga disappeared. They had a baby together. My grandmother was like maybe 2, 3 years old. Nigga just dipped. Peaced out. Peace to the left. And word on the curb was he was light bright and kind of like Robert, okay? I don't know if that nigga actually went on to pass because I did an Ancestry DNA, and on that side of the family is a bunch of adopted people. Really weird. Like a bunch of men in their 50s and 60s who were all adopted. So it sounds like Herbert just went on spreading the South Carolina dig all throughout New York. But he dipped on Louise and couldn't nobody find him after. But I thought that it was interesting to bring in the passing element, and I appreciated, the acknowledgement of it. But again, this really read like a super historical take. A super historical take on the different things that African Americans were experiencing during this time. It was absolutely a tragedy on so many levels. We have her travel out of Pratt City, Alabama, end up in Harlem with a husband who looked and presented as white, and pretty quickly on, he leaves her with their child to pass as white. And it was extremely devastating. That scene in the bathroom, like she's already facing a level of colorism that she can't get. She's this beautiful singing voice, but she can't get put on as a singer because she's too dark skinned. And so she takes a job working and cleaning and goes in the bathroom to find her husband sick and throwing up, the man she thought was her husband. And then these white men come in and force him to essentially rape her. That was rough. Like for that to be the end of your relationship, for that, like there's just so many layers, right? The man you love, the man you envision your future with, the man you had a child with, like he just leaves you with all these burdens and all this trauma. And in the vision of how Black women just survived without any tools, she did what best she could with that trauma. But unfortunately, somehow Sonny absorbed, and I don't think it's the fault of Willie, but Sonny felt that and absorbed that, and it came in the way that trauma passed on through him was also very devastating. Yeah, it's crazy because the idea to move to New York was Willie's idea, and Willie was the one that was like, "Let's go out and get it." She was the one with the gumption and the ambition, and her husband just had the looks of a white person. And it's it like I think that's low key like a little nod to how much like phenotype and the way we present can move things along for us, regardless of our talent, our skill set, or actually will to be. Word to the baby hair brigade, okay? Some folks can just get put on off the string of light colored eyes and silky textured hair. And that was Robert. I think Sonny, if I'm gonna give the book grace, I will say that Sonny turned out a drug addict because partly connected to the trauma that his mother absorbed and, never really worked through, right? Like, there was never a conversation until Sonny was an adult about who his father was. Sonny, Willie, I keep mixing up these names because they're all male names or ambiguous names. Willie just thought, in her explanation to Sonny at like 40 something, just thought that having her son forget who the father was would save him from the trauma and heartbreak of the father leaving the family. Now, that's the grace I can give. That's where I would say, okay, it's connected to the trauma of not dealing with his father abandoning him and then the resentment he built up towards his mother. That manifesting in a sort of lostness and a nihilistic outlook at his life. If I was going to give it a critique of the book, I would say that it felt like Sonny turned out druggy because niggas was doing drugs in that period, and that's historically what Yaa Gyasi read in the book, and so that's how it went. And that's part of where it's like, okay, some of these things just seem a little too, boom, 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 and not really connected to a sort of personal connection that the author had to the lineage. Yeah, I mean, it's true. Willie turned to the church. We get themes of religion on both sides, right? And this sort of, the white man's God. That's one of the quotes from the book. And how the white man's God could not save us on either side, right? You have a Bina who ends up returning to like the white missionary. And, the moment that both families leave behind their connection to the God that they knew, they all kind of just, the trauma just kind of spills out. Even though on the American side, there really wasn't no option. There was no holding on to the God, right? But you do kind of get in Ness's chapter. And, speaking of Ness, I know this is part one, we're part two. But even the way that Ness's name kind of gets breaking down, right? That her name was based on her mother, only English where her mother really said was goodness. And so you end up with Ness and, the way that we might hold on to the naming system and nomenclature in an African community as more validated or more valuable because, you can say, what is Akua, Monday or Wednesday or something? It's a day of the week. And that there's a connection to how this naming system works. And how much names come up on the Ghanaian side. And we never really address, until we get to Sonny, we don't really address how names come about. But there is sort of this underlying motif about the value and heritage of your name. And so I thought it was interesting the way Nessa's name came about because I still felt like, there's still a value in this. There's still a heritage in this. But the way that we might dismiss it because, African Americans just have weird names and we just kind of throw our nose up at it. I thought it was interesting. Okay, so y'all are saying, is it stereotypical or a retelling of themes that happened to a lot of African Americans in the time? I don't take issue with the fact that it happened and it's being put into the story, but the way it's being put into the story, I felt like things on the Ghanaian side were put into the story that happened in Ghana, right? We get the decolonization, we get the kind of intellectual community that happened around the decolonization process in Ghana with Yaa's character. We get the missionaries and Christianity coming into the community. We get some of the very similar things. We get, what would be considered tribalism and, the political lines that are drawn between the Ga, the Fanti, and the Ashanti. We get all those nods with Prempeh and Yaa, I'm not the woman's who rose up against the British and then was put into exile. Or Prempeh was put into exile, right? So we get all these historical nods and all these things that check off in the guy. And I just felt like it was a little bit more, it was more, and I don't know, and I could be wrong. I'm not saying I'm right on this because I have a connection to the African American side. That's a side I'm familiar with. And so for me, reading the Ghanaian side, I'm not reading it as a Ghanaian. And a Ghanaian might read this and be like, okay, These are all very similar too. And it's just checking it off. But I felt as a reader that the Ghanaian side felt more nuanced. And the African American side it was historically accurate. And that's why I love the book. But I felt that, yeah, Yaa Asante. Am I saying that right? But I felt like it didn't, it's just like Sonny like met the jazz singer and walked to the crack house and tried got a bag of was given a bag of coke or something and just started sniffing like okay. I don't know. I thought the Ghanaian side just felt very poetic, and the African American side felt a little less poetic. Though I'm not at all saying that it was historically inaccurate or that it didn't happen. I very much felt like one of Yaa Gyasi's strengths in this was that this book followed a very historical perspective on both sides. Okay. Ooh. Willie's story was just so sad. And how she couldn't sing. She had this beautiful voice, and that rape took away her voice until Sunny was like a teenager. And it like, me reading it in 2020, I was, you're just kind of like, Dad, she couldn't do this, she couldn't do that, she couldn't, you like, you're attached to this character and you want them to like, okay, don't let the club owner or whoever the club manager was just tell you too dark to sing like sis. Just get out. I mean, do something. I don't know what was we doing in the 1920s? Can you sing on the corner? I don't know where was Madam C.J. Walker at? Where was his daughter? Like you couldn't go to their Harlem salon and like find a way out. Like I mean, we always want these triumph stories, but it's so true that a lot of people were just able to get by, and that they should still be celebrated for that. But it's still like so like dad. You just want more for Willie. You want more. Okay, so Yao, who was the son of Akua and Asamoah. So Yao was, and okay, so I've been to Ghana, right? I went to Ghana for what, 8 weeks in 2015. Y'all felt of like a very like I've met this type of character before, and also when I think of like Kwame Nkrumah, and what book did I read? It was actually a book by Chinua Achebe, who's Nigerian, about the Biafran War. Oh, the book is called There Was a Country. For some reason, I thought that There Was a Country was a movie. Okay. Chinua Achebe has a book called There Was a Country that's basically a breakdown of the Biafran War, right? But it's like your quintessential African uncle writing about a war and really is asserting how intellectual the problem was, right? And asserting how West African culture is typically discussed. And oh, you went to LT Alice's. I hope it was great. I still miss some twists. I hear, yeah, I low key want to go back and get my hair braided there. I'll catch a whole flight just for that. But in There Was a Country, Achebe is really asserting that the Biafran War, which isn't really much discussed outside of like Nigeria, was a war that was started by intellectuals. And really kind of showing like the literati and the political intellectual circuit that existed throughout West Africa. And part of his book does discuss what was happening and who the political leaders were in Ghana. And I remember just reading the book and thinking he was really trying to assert that African leaders are intellectuals, and a lot of times in the way mainstream news discuss them as like tribal warriors and as really aggressive people. And there was not just intellectual in like, okay, political savvy, how to achieve power, but intellectual in that they've read a lot of the political theory that has come out of the canon of art of Western culture, right? And I felt like Yaa was kind of a continuation of that sort of trope, right? Like the African uncle who was very intellectual. He's a college professor. Um, and looking at how to decolonize not through a mode of violence, but through a mode of intellectual political theory. And so I felt like his character felt familiar. He deeply resents his mother, and he's extremely insecure about the burn that is on his face. As we're reading this, I could not imagine what that burn looked like. I felt like the book is really descriptive and did a good job of describing it, but for something in my mind, like I'm typically good at like being able to picture characters. I, for the life of me, could not picture what y'all look like. I don't, I think I got stuck at Seal, which is horrible, to be honest. Ah, Abina, it is like, that scene wasn't super clear to me about was she actually killed by the white missionary? Or did something happen? Like the way it's discussed in Akua's story, I was like, wait, I'm not sure what this is saying. Yeah, so the syllabus does both discuss how both Sunny and Yaa have a deep resentment of their mother and their mother's actions. Okay, we got one person saying he drowned her and one person saying he burned her. I really got to go back and read that because I was like, wait, he basically drowned her to death. The way it was described, I was just like, wait, what is happening here? And how does Akua not like run away from this man as a child? Like, how does she get stuck with her? I'm gonna have to go back and read that because it was so murky the way the white missionary was explained. How did I miss this whole thing? Where I promise you, I read this chapter 2 days ago. I'm really about to pull back up. It's discussed in Abina's chapter. He said he burned her stuff, but he didn't burn all her stuff. I did get that part. Man, Abina's story was part one, so we haven't really discussed her story. But her story was so sad because it felt like the ambition was snuffed out of her. Like she felt like a woman with her wits about her and somehow got trapped. All right, I'll have to read Akua's story again to get that because somehow that didn't land for me when I was reading it. Okay. I can't sit here on camera and read. We'll do it after we end this. But back to Yao, who works as a history teacher at an all-boys high school and is hopeful that Ghana will gain independence. Okay, is that what was happening where he tells Akua what actually happened to his mother? All right, I think that's why, because I was like, maybe I was reading it too fast. Like typically when I read first thing in the morning, and by the time I got to Akua's story, I was like, okay, I'm just trying to get through the book at this point. I was still sad about about H. Oh, so I'll have to go back. Page 189 for the soft cover. Well, let's pull it up. We're going to do a read along. I have the hardcover. Your mother, Ibina, she wouldn't repent. She came to us pregnant, you, her sin, but she still wouldn't repent. She spit at the British. She was argumentative and angry. I believe she was glad of her sins. I believe she did not regret you or your father, even though she did not care for her as a man should. Or though he did not care for her as a man should. After you were born, oh, okay, that's what, you know, when you miss a word. When you miss a whole damn word, I took her to the water to be baptized. Did Akua kill him though? She had to walk over his body and leave. The shaking was so loud. Oh Lord. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you for the catch up on what the book you actually read, Josie, but break. How did y'all feel about Yao meeting his mother after so many years? I thought the context of it was very interesting and that Esther had to encourage him to go home. But I was happy that the reconnection happened. And almost that, like, you know, his mother came out of it, like, with, like, spry. I think it's the actual word that they use to describe her. And, you know, with life in her and a life to still live. Also, I remember that these women were having children extremely young, you know, like 16 and 17 years old. So in my mind, you know, you tell me Yao's 40 something years old, then uh, Akua should be like 60, 70, but in reality, she's probably in her late 50s, early 60s. But I absolutely, yeah, it was a moment of healing for them. And I actually thought it was a very beautiful moment that they could come together and the way they came together. And I don't think it would have made sense considering what Akua did for her to still be able to raise her child and have this child who loved her deeply. You had to have some sort of separation in order for her to come back as a character who could be respected after, even though she didn't consciously kill her children, but after she, you know, committed that murder. I loved it. And compared to their bath wounds as a a symbolism, where are my words, of their connection. Yeah, I thought it was actually a really beautiful moment. I don't think she was. So Yao's mom for burning down the hut. I think it was a vision. And I think the vision was connected to the atrocities committed by her ancestors. And I think one of the themes is generational trauma in this book and how you cannot evade the actions of your ancestors, that will impact your lineage for in ways that you have no idea. And so I thought that was really prophetic to the lineage that she came from. Because you were reading with your contemporary mind, you felt his mama issues was impacting his love life. I mean, I think his insecurities, his lack of mothering, and his lack of dealing with his emotions in general, which are connected to his mother, were very much so impacting his love life, and the healing was. You're absolutely correct. The healing was very necessary. Yeah, it's interesting though. Does the African American side get this sort of freedom from a generational curse? You know, and that goes back to why I felt the Ghanaian side was more nuanced. Because I don't feel like this reconnecting moment, like they reconnected, right? Because Marcus has a really positive outlook on his family and he loves his grandmother and his father. But I don't feel like there was a sort of reconnection moment that was beautiful in the way that Yao and Akua's connection was. It was like, you know, Sonny ending up on methadone after his mama told him about his ancient ass daddy who was passing for white. You know, it was a little less. I don't know. Is thoughtful the right word? Because I'm not saying the book was bad. It didn't make me dislike the book, but it was like, oh, okay. Whose favorite quote was this? I asked the other day about favorite quotes from any of the books we read. I want to say, Alina, did you post this quote? But we believe the one who has the power is the one who gets to write the story. So when you study history, you must always ask yourself, whose story am I missing? What voice was suppressed so that this story should come forth? Once you have figured that out, you must find that story too. From there, you begin to get a clearer, yet still imperfect picture. He has a really beautiful quote. And it actually goes right in line with our complex theory read of Black feminist thought. I'm talking about, who controls the narrative? The people who tell the story, the people who research and pull the story out. And when it's not, and when you erase communities from the ability to tell their story, you do erase their voice and you do suppress a perspective that's very valuable. Right. I didn't feel like Sunny and Willie reconnect, but it didn't feel as emotional or as like deeply seated and spiritual as Yao and Akua's reconnection. All right. So now we've been talking about Sunny. Let's just go ahead and talk about Sunny. Who said earlier? Let me scroll back up because I think someone hit it for me about what I thought about the writing of Sunny's story. Because it was a little interesting. Okay, this is what they were saying they agree with my point about the African American characters lacking some nuance or like emotional connection from the author. Sonny seemed to be this intelligent guy who was so easily led astray by a woman. It seemed interesting that, you know, he was not necessarily, was he a member of NAACP, but he at least had a job with the NAACP, and the function of that, and because he was going to tenant homes and, trying to fight for, essentially collecting stories that would supposedly help with tenant rights, that there was no other interaction within the NAACP in Harlem. He wasn't in the NAACP in like some small town backwoods. Like, he's in the NAACP chapter in the territory of Adam Clayton Powell and Thurgood Marshall during the era where they were that nigga, for lack of a better colloquialism. But that he didn't, there was no other interaction. Not that he couldn't end up in drugs, but that it took, like, okay, he was just so depressed he quit the job, and then 2 pages later, he's sitting on a bench with some dope in his hand. And, it's like, dag, like, that just happened so quickly. It reminded you of Eloquent Rage and The Smartest Man I Knew chapter from our previous reading. It's interesting how the women and Willie picked herself up, and these men just kind of downtrodden themselves and kind of sit in their ain't shitness. And it's like, dag, I want it better for you. But then somehow the catalyst for his real downfall was Amani, the woman. He was probably a deadbeat before being on drugs. And I thought that was interesting too, that, he then has a son, Marcus, who he clearly fathers, but Marcus never references. Marcus says all my cousins and my grandma and my father. And I'm like, nigga, you got like 3, 4, 11 siblings. What about your sister? What about the one with a little bit of developmental delay? Like, you know what I mean? How does Sonny suddenly get his act together in his 50s and doesn't at all reconnect, especially if family becomes valuable? And Willie was having some sort of role in all her grandchildren's lives. How was there no acknowledgement of Sonny getting his act together by also parenting all his children and not just Marcus? Um, Do we know if Marcus was his only? Yeah, he did have 3. It was said he had 3 girls, but we don't ever, like, after the one woman shows up to the house and was like, Sonny, I know you up there. We don't hear nothing about them girls. Again, and Sonny reappears in Marcus's chapter. I don't think it was discussed, but I think we could extrapolate that but I don't feel like the author made a point of it because there wasn't like some part where I don't clearly my memory in reading this book from 2 days ago is shot to shit because I want to say I don't recall Sonny having some epiphany about his son being born and therefore needing to be a father specifically to the son that wasn't landing for being a girl dad. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't recall the author diving into that. Hmm. I mean, I agree, but like once he gets his act together, doesn't he reach back out? Doesn't he make his son aware that he has sisters? Because it seems like, well, we don't know because he ends up on dope, and we don't hear anything else about the women. It just kind of becomes about the dope. Mm. Um. So in ooh, the syllabus, I think this is interesting that this is the point Morgan presents about Sunny. Ultimately, Sonny, who was a descendant of Essie's bloodline, is a symbol of revolution and the freedom struggle. His devotion to social justice fuels his anger and passion for black advancement and liberation, but never seems to exacerbate much progress in his personal life. Mm, I don't know why we don't. I don't know. Is it fair for me to say that I would have liked a little bit more exploration into his connection to the social justice? Because it just felt like a footnote. But like we, mm, mm, mm. We can't go back to something we ain't never been in the first place. It ain't ours anymore. This is. Whew. Okay. Yeah, and I mean, I don't have a problem that he didn't actualize his passion for black advancement because, I think that's a credible storyline, right? That plenty of people are, hashtag activists and they can, with that, you have the foresight to know that this needs change. You have the foresight to understand the beginning of the politics that surround that and say, okay, I would like to do something about it, but then quickly lose interest when you realize how deeply devastating it is and how much work it really will require. But I would have, it kind of got wrapped up in like two sentences. Yeah. He did. He got overwhelmed one day taking the notes from Tenements. And, he knew it because he lived in it growing up and realizing that there really wasn't anything that could be done and then ended up on crack. Okay. So Marjorie, who is the youngest descendant of the late Afia, born in Ghana and raised in Huntsville, Alabama, I personally thought Marjorie's chapter was like Yaa Gyasi. And I wish Yaa had a bit more public facing of a life because she does not have any like active social media. She's like impossible to find. And she really doesn't like doing interviews and answering any sort of personal questions. But I thought Marjorie was just like Yaa. I'm not Yaa. Well, yeah, Yaa Gyasi. I was thinking Yao, Yaa. Yo, is this book really exactly 300 pages? Yo, that I didn't even think about the fact that like, bitch, literally the book is exactly. Oh, can you see it? You see a little number. Oh, my webcam is acting shady. It was exactly 300 pages, and trying to ask for more. It's like, she just gave us enough to make it interesting. You asking for too much. But I'm saying I felt like Akua's storyline was very thoroughly invested in. And then we get to the African Americans, it's like, that is hilarious. No, I have not watched the YouTube interview. I actually have my copy of the book is autographed. Because I like saw her interview live. Ooh, that's not the autograph. She came to Dallas for a festival, and I happened to be like walking around that day, and I lived across the street from the library, and I was like, oh, let me go in the library, and they had like a big poster like, yeah, Jesse's coming to talk, and I pulled up, and it was like, oh, okay. Yeah, where's my webcam? Thank you for coming. So I saw her interview in person, and the way she answered questions, I was just kind of like, oh, okay. She don't really want to she don't want to be here. I don't think, having read Americana and seeing how many African immigrants have related to the characters in Americana, and I don't think a theme that Africans immigrating to America and the shock of being forcefully associated as African American or Black kind of pushes them back to not relate to the African American community. And that I don't think it's unusual that she would relate to another immigrant, even though he was a European immigrant and he played the shit out of her. I think that's quote unquote pretty standard experience. I don't necessarily understand it because it's not my preview. It's not my experience. I don't understand why take the shade and fuckery from the whites. But as soon as, the Black kid cracks one joke, it's like, oh no, can't ever fuck with you again. That I don't understand necessarily, but I liked Marjorie's story. It was quick but cute. I see first and second generation African students struggle socially on the regular. Yaa Gyasi, I was trying to figure out who is Yaa Gyasi's partner, because in the book she thanks Matthew at the end, at the very, very, very end. She thanks a man who is a historian, and he's Black. Is he light skinned Black? I didn't really look him up too deeply. I was like, I don't know how invested I really am. Like, how much has it changed my opinion of the book to find out who Yaa is with? But she thanks Matthew Nelson Touche. Is he mixed? Because I looked him up and I saw him. He's like Syphilis Lapham on Twitter, and for whatever reason, I didn't make it to like Instagram. I don't know what I did with it. I like looked it up and then let me look it up again. Oh, here it goes because it's on my recent searches. Yeah. Silas Lapham, and then I was like, okay, maybe I should look this up on Instagram, see if I could find a picture of him. But the way she thanked him, it was like, ooh, is this Bill? Oh, he ain't even on. He ain't got no pictures of himself. I was like, he either funny looking. No, let me not be disrespectful. Okay. But how do we know this is Bay? He don't have no. Is this him? Is this the white man? No. That's Doctor. Okay. Why do people not post pictures of themselves? Like, why are we hiding? Yeah, I mean, I know his name. I just haven't been able to find a picture of him because that's a similar name to another person. So, yeah, I don't. I'll have to look it up later because he has the same name as somebody else. So, oh, maybe there's a picture here. No, that cannot be him. Not this man from Piedmont College with this funky looking face. Okay, so this guy on Instagram is not the same person. Yeah, Fulbrighter, American, African American, Southern. Oh, wait, is this the same person? Girl, I'll have to look this up later. Don't tell me this is a whole white man. I was confused. We're veering off. Okay. Marjorie, I wasn't. If I had to pick a least favorite chapter, Marjorie. It wasn't. I wasn't doing it for me. I'm now like too invested in finding out what this man looks like. This is ridiculous. Marjorie's relationship with Graham made me realize the differences in assimilation between white and black immigrants. I mean, yeah, there would very obviously be a difference in assimilation. Because of the way, I don't think white people come to this country and are forced to have an identity that also puts them at like the bottom of the totem pole. Like it's a privilege to be white, and it comes with a lot of power and accessibility. And it doesn't translate the same way for black immigrants, and so they are forced to, move about assimilation in quite a different way. No, no, no. The Matthew Nelson Toach she is thinking is a white guy. This is weird. But there's a Matthew Toach. Oh, maybe he only likes black literature and he is a white guy. Okay. Is that her partner? She dating a whole lot white guy? Here go a picture of him. Because they were both in the, well, I guess if they met in Iowa, why would I thought she met another nigga? Iowa's Writers Workshop. He's at Baruch. Okay, yeah, it's a whole white guy. Okay. I absolutely love their connection to each other. Um, I don't I want to be careful here, right? Because I don't think that this idea, I'm always kind of mystified by this idea that, how quickly we can kind of pack up dismissing. Like you move to Alabama of all, and you're that close to like Pratt City and these other connections, and there's no sort of like thought or connection to the black community there, and it quickly becomes about the white immigrant. But it's also like I could have negative thoughts about that, but it's like it's a true storyline. Like it's true to the experience. I might not care for it, but it's true. That's what really be happening. But I absolutely loved her connection with the grandmother. I love that finally got a character who we continue to see throughout the story, who has some sort of positive ending. And of all characters that get the positive ending, Akua is the really interesting one to pull that. But when we get to Marjorie, and then, well, Marjorie's childhood was just short in general, and it kind of really does center around her grandmother and her identity, and it doesn't really dig into it. It just gets, as Alana said, she decided on 300 pages and wrapped it up and made sure we got 300 pages. And then Marjorie is really meant to connect with Marcus. And Marcus's chapter just felt like we are a little out of bounds here with how to write the linguistics of niggas. Deontay, their exchanges felt a little like, okay, this feels a little forced. This feels a little inauthentic. This feels a little But Marcus is getting his PhD in sociology at Stanford, and he's having a hard time. He's having a hard time, pursuing his research at the point where we find him, and him and Marjorie hit it off. And part of that is because he wanted to connect his research to his historical lineage, and how his grandfather his great grandfather was put into sold into convict labor, and how that changed the lineage of his family and the impact that had on. But what he realizes, you open one door to the ills and trauma that the Black community face, and then there's all these other things that connect to it, right? There's all these other issues that he then wants to talk about. It's just the frustration of feeling like, how do I just research this one area that negatively impacted my family when there's all these other areas that are interconnected to that one area. Oh man, I wonder on the audiobook, how does those conversations between Marcus, there was one line and I meant to highlight it where like Deontay says something and I'm like, don't nobody say all that kind of slang in one sentence, but okay, bruh. So I wonder how on the audiobook version that reads. I think I've seen the common theme in the book club was that for a lot of folks, oh, what was the quote that summed up the book for you in Marcus's chapter? Well, let's pull up Facebook. I can search in the group for your name. Why do I keep hitting caps lock? The favorite quotes one. Okay. Okay, here. I'm going to copy and paste the quote here. Oh, you commented it. Oh, I can just add your comment. Okay. It was it was one thing to research something, another thing entirely to have it lived, to have felt it. How could he explain to Marjorie that he wanted to capture with his project? What he wanted to capture with his project was the feeling of time, of having been a part of something that was stretched so far back, was so impossibly large, that it was easy to forget that she and he and everyone else existed in it, not apart from it, but inside of it. What a beautiful quote. That does very aptly sum up the entirety of the themes of this book. I did feel like overall, I don't take issue with the ending, but it did feel, and now I'm gonna crack up because now I'm like, dang, Alana, you was right. That 300 pages, like she decided on 300, and that's where she ended. And so like I was kind of like, what was the ending? Well, my initial thought was like, well, how much more can you expect, right? I wasn't upset that we didn't get like these sweeping, enthralling tales for Marcus and Marjorie. But now I'm thinking, dag, she really decided on a page number and she had 10 pages left for two more characters. And that's what we got. You know? But I didn't take issue with it on my first reading. I didn't really feel like I needed more. The audiobook was nice. There was a different accent for each of the African American chapters. Dak, I have to go back and pull the audiobook on my Audible account. You use my credit that I have left. I I didn't, okay, as much as we can joke, like she had 10 pages left, that's what she went with. I didn't feel like the ending was haphazard. And part of me was absolutely ready for the book to be over. And this is my favorite book. So I don't say that in like, I was ready for it to be over because I hated it. But I was ready for it to be over because I just felt like it covered everything. I felt like they hit all the notes. And I didn't need, I was emotionally stressed. Like at that point in the book, I was tired. I had been pulled through all the emotions. And so it's like, okay, we got to page 300. I too am glad to end here. Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a general consensus that like it was so abrupt and rushed. But I have a hard time saying what the ending should have been because I think otherwise the book is really well written. Even though I will say for me as an African American, I felt like the Ghanaian side in part 2 had more emotional nuance. I still think it was a beautifully written book. I think she did a wonderful job overall, and I had so many range of emotions reading this book, and it really wore me the fuck out. Like, girl, if you did it the ending, it's okay. We'll catch you. I have Transcendent Kingdom. I have a early copy of that book. I think it's coming out in like a month or two. I don't know when I'm gonna have time to read it because I'm trying to read all the over shit we read in the book club. But I think everyone kind of agrees there was no transition out. The ending felt very Danielle Steele Lifetime movie. The way you are summing this book up has me cackling. She showed it. She said, okay, we got 3 pages to take these niggas from the fire and the water and bring the symbolism all the way back around. And how, like, come on, Marjorie just gonna give her necklace from her grandma that's been her family for how long? To Marcus? We ain't even solid. I mean, if they taking a 21-hour flight to Ghana, they must be something. But damn, we wasn't even. Mm-mm. And of all waters, have y'all been to West Africa? And they were there during Harmattan, during like the dusty season. I went to Ghana. We was at Labadi Beach. I was like, baby, my ancestors barely survived that ocean. I ain't getting back in that bitch. Hell to the no. The waves was just doing the most. There was nothing appealing about like getting. Was that the Atlantic Ocean? I was like, oh no, I ain't finna get carried away. No, it was too much. And I can swim. So I don't know how a man that's been afraid of water his whole life went running into the water at that beach because them waves be crashing. Them waters is rough. All right. And there is too much ancestral connection to that shit that would ever inspire me to run out into the ocean, especially if I was scared of the water in the first place. No. Hard no. I think all of us kind of wanted something more, but I mean, I don't think the ending was unrealistic. I just now that y'all pointed out the 300 pages, I'm side eyeing her for the way it did end because we could have really got to 303 and given a little bit of more of. Mm. Oh, she did just say have it. Like now we can have all the jokes about how this book ended, which is hilarious, right? Because you're right, it's her debut. We should ain't nobody trying to drag Yaa, right? She did a magnificent job. It was a great book. It ranks high on my list. But how you have this nigga's been in your family through the fires, through the drownings, through the chopping the legs off, through the burning of the kids, through ancient ass mamas, all these step mamas, all this shit. This nigga's been in your family for we covered a good 400 years. And you just say, have it. Y'all was like, y'all want poetics? I got 1 page left. That's what y'all get. Yeah, I've been to Elmira Castle. I've been to the castle discussed in the book. I've been to the door of no return. Did Marcus did no, I don't think it was lost on the slave ship. I think was it lost on the slave ship? Did it make it on the slave ship? I think it was lost before they ever like it was like she was dragged out the castle to be raped. And she didn't have it on her, like it was buried beneath. Is that how it went? Don't let me, y'all see my memory shot. It's been a sad day. I had therapy today too, so my memory is already kind of crazy. Okay, y'all are confirming. Y'all have been to Labadi Beach. Y'all been to the beach. Even the beach, Elmira Castle. Where did they run? They were by Elmira Castle, right? So they were up the coastline. There are nah, and the interesting thing about like that area of Ghana, there's quite a few like resorts that are on your way up, and they all have like private pool areas and like private. You go to take pictures. You don't go to get in the water. I'm trying to tell y'all the water, the seas off of West Africa. The beaches, actually, when I was in Togo, the beaches are very pretty there, but it wasn't no way in hell I was getting in that water. Mm-mm. And I'm not scared of the water like that. That how did The Color Purple actually end? Did it end the same way? You know, I've never read the book. I've only seen the movie, but I definitely Temple of My Familiar is my favorite book, and it's actually the sequel to Color Purple. So I need to go read Color Purple. Girl, go help your son with homework, and please, y'all know all the. I don't know people. Is it not known that all the lives stay up in the book club? I know I delete my shit on Instagram. That's the only place I delete things. I do not delete nothing in the book club. Okay, the stone on Essie's side was lost in the dungeon. Right. That's how I remember it happening. She was like trying to dig it out and couldn't, and it got left there. Dag. Dag. You know, you kind of want to. I appreciate that the book does a good job of kind of walking the line of mysticism, even though the mysticism largely just shows up on the Ghanaian side, and doesn't. I think there was a little bit more. You know, if we had gotten 5 more pages, she could have put a little bit of on the African American side too. You know, like I will say some of the Ghanaian, and even because Sam was Nigerian or Yoruba, let's not assume all Yoruba people ain't from Nigeria. Could have been from Benin, who knows? Okay, Yoruba land was big, but it was interesting how quickly some of the native religion and customs got washed away from the African American side, that nothing kind of tinkered down, whether it was like, you know, I don't know, different color glass or like naming or like words. Because, well, you know, up into Kojo, there was still like some language, right, happening. And so it's interesting that we get into the mid 1800s and there wasn't this sort of it kind of, well, I mean, I guess, you know, it was because H didn't grow up with Anna and we didn't carry on. So who knows with the 7 other kids that Kojo had, if maybe some sort of the specifically Ashanti, because they grew up with a woman who distinctly remembers Ashanti land. If some of that carried on, but you know, I can't, that's just me nitpicking because it makes sense. H didn't grow up with Kojo and it kind of abruptly, you know, the traditions end and there was no coming back to it, even though didn't H grow up on some sort of plantation? Did nobody else take him in? I don't know. Well, that's asking for too much, right? The book was realistic. It followed like actual patterns. So like, you know, that's just me being nitpicky about it. Okay. All right. We have gone long. Y'all know these are supposed to be an hour long, and I'm clearly hungry because I'm still trying to finish my last 2 pieces of sushi. So thank y'all for joining. I hope y'all love this book. I am so sorry that we read low key a sad book during the quarantine, during the craziest months of the quarantine. I know so many of us are surrounded, like myself, by grief and death. And so I hope this book wasn't too triggering for folks. I hope maybe, I don't know. I'm sorry, y'all. I hope hood feminism is, I don't know, will hood feminism be a little bit more rah-rah at least? Like, clap back, snap back. We're still talking to, I'm trying to get Yaa Gyasi for an interview. I'm trying to swindle it, but it's crazy. Professors are so much easier to get in touch with. I will forever be grateful to Dr. Cooper for agreeing to come do an author chat. But I have been spending a lot of time emailing white publishers, and they looking at me cross-eyed. Like, we already did an interview with Well-Read Black Girl. Why are we going to do an interview with you? So we trying. Trying. Um, have I read the book for May yet? No, I'm reading it with you. I'm halfway through the book. I started. But no, I don't write the syllabus or the syllabi, so I don't necessarily always read the books before y'all read them. Most of the books I have read before y'all, but some of the books like Sula I read with y'all. This I reread with y'all. I also have a bad memory. I can read something, and because I'm doing a million and one things, and if I don't sit down and like study a book, which is why I formatted the book club the way I formatted it, so that like it can stick. Because I'm one of the people like if I don't have these sort of discussions, I'll forget tomorrow what I read. So, all right. Thank y'all for joining. Have a good night. Stay safe during the quarantine, and I will see y'all for Black Feminist Thought maybe next week. And we will continue on with hood feminism. And if you're still reading Homegoing, we can still, this is meant to be evergreen. Also, we started a bookshop account, so to give people another option besides Amazon, because we were looking at Amazon before. But Bookshop has a good setup, and if you're an insider, all the books that we have told y'all are on the Bookshop. But we will be using the Bookshop links from here on out to announce what books we're reading. All right. Thank y'all for joining. Have a good night. Bye.